You were, Ray, among the first people to computerize, if you will, systematize, computerize the investment process, right? To turn your ideas, your principles into algorithms and put them to work in financial markets. I don't know of anybody who has tried to computerize the management process the way that you have. Why do you think it is that Ray Dalio, in that respect, is out there on his own?
I think it's going to happen. I think I learned at a very, many years ago, that almost anything that I think, I can computerize the criteria for making decisions. By the way, that would be one of the greatest gifts I can give people, is the understanding of when you're thinking, I'm making a decision. Now slow up and think, what are the criteria? Write those criteria down. You can put those criteria into equations, because the brain is 89 billion neurons, which are little computers, and then it gets input from the outside. Well, what your brain is doing can in many ways be done better by the computer if you go through that exercise. So I learned that almost any decision making could be computerized. So now, whenever I'm dealing with people, I realized that could be put into algorithms. Okay, now imagine the power of that. Just like in the investment. Because it knows all of that information. It knows what all those people are like. It knows what's happening. And when it has all that power of all of that information, and it has those types of criteria, it can bring to you all of that. And it makes that decision in the same way our investment can be making decisions. So right now, it's working like a GPS works in parallel. And I think that's, by the way, the best. When you have the computer making the decision like a GPS makes a decision, and you're making a decision in parallel, those two things line up and you make better decisions. And
all companies eventually will do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And people too?
Yeah. I think that you're not far from being able to go to your smartphone, and just like you call in Google and you say, what am I, what's the facts? And you get your facts like this, that you'll be able to call in and get your advice. Idea meritocratic decision making by experts. You see, two things are coming together at the same time, and that is radical transparency and algorithmic decision making. Okay, radical transparency means that almost anybody can know almost everything about you, maybe more than your wife knows about you, because you're leaving this data, these fingerprints all over the place. So the data on you gives you a profile so that the computer knows you, okay? You take that data and you put it together with algorithms, and those algorithms are going to say, how do I deal with him in a way that's better, more tailored to you than the human could? That's where we are, right?
Is the outcome inevitably good? Because if you think about it, the outcome of a system like that, particularly put to bad use, could be frightening.
Well, it's like most things. It has good and bad sides to it. But I think that, like we found it miraculous because you certainly can make better decisions. You can make those decisions idea meritocratically if everybody's involved in making those algorithms. In other words, like I wrote the principles in the book, you could write an algorithm. And since everybody agrees on the algorithm, they agree on the decision-making criteria.
So you think it has applicability. Right now, the machine you've built works for a 1,500-person, privately owned company. How applicable is it to other organizations? Is it applicable to other companies? Maybe not in its exact form, but something similar to it? Larger companies? Is it applicable to governments?
Let's first make clear what the it is. I think it's the broad category of, do you have an idea meritocracy? If that's the it that you're talking about.
Well, there are two its. Okay. Idea meritocracy on the one hand, and a systematic way of supporting it on the other.
Yeah. First of all, you have to want the first.
I mean, as an ideal, everyone should be able to embrace right? An idea
Yeah.
meritocracy.
But in order to...
So it's the second part, really, that's the bigger question.
It's the first part that's the bigger question. And the reason it's the first part...
Well, that's the more existential question.
Yeah, can you be honest with each other? Can you accept reality? And can you find it?
Well, let's make the assumption that you can.
Okay. So, but I did first want the idea meritocracy because I'm going to have partnerships and how am I going to behave with each other and all that. And it was the need for that that led to the development of tools and this other stuff. So I think that you first have to have the need for the idea meritocracy. And if you have that need, then you will find your way.
I get it. It has to be an evolutionary organic process. You can't drop it in. It's not a piece of software you can download.
Well, you can do this we can drop in. We're about to take algorithms that we have and tools, and we're going to give them to others. Well, we're figuring out how to make that fit in a number of other companies to just pass it along. I'd love these tools to be able to be used by anybody who cares to use the tools.
You've intrigued me. Are we talking about big companies? Or are we talking about...
Big companies, oh yeah, who are eager to use it. I don't want to mention their names, but big companies that are eager to use those tools. Eager to use those tools and eager to have an idea meritocracy.
Give us a sense. It's a little difficult to talk about it in abstract terms. Are we talking about a GE kind of a company?
We're talking about Silicon Valley type companies.
Really?
Yeah.
Big Silicon Valley.
Big Silicon Valley companies, but a bit beyond Silicon Valley. Particularly though in Silicon Valley, there is more of that notion that there's a power in crowdsourcing, decision making, and that it is idea meritocratic. So there is a desire really to have those things. And then to use tools, because we've developed so many, to pass them along. There's a lot of that kind of desire. Traditional organizations are more challenged by that. But I'm still seeing it in other traditional organizations. I won't drop specific companies because it wouldn't be fair to them. But in many traditional organizations, you're seeing them become less traditional. And you certainly are seeing them use tools and data to understand their people and to help those people work together. Now the question is, do they do that radically transparently and radically honestly?
Now, is this going to be a business for Bridgewater, or is this something that you're doing altruistically?
It won't be a business for Bridgewater. I don't know what we're going to do. We haven't figured out exactly how we're going to do it, but we'll get those things out there somehow. That's where it is, really.
And how far away are we from seeing the first evidence of that effort?
You know, probably 18 months, 2 years, something like that.
Pretty close.
Many successful companies find it hard to thrive once their founders move on. The next generation doesn't share the same values, or the culture gets watered down. Ray Dalio wants to make sure that doesn't happen at Bridgewater.
Ray, you're clearly very concerned with succession and with Bridgewater's future. Unsurprisingly, but you're very concerned. Why is it so important?
Well, I don't, I have a saying, if you're not worried, you need to worry. And if you're worried, you don't need to worry. Because if you worry about things, then you take care of those things. So when I say concerned, we've been going through what we said was an up to 10-year transition process. Turned out it's taken about 7 years. And concerned would be the wrong word. What I am is like, as I say, going from one generation to another. So if you have a 40-year-old who I've worked with, all these people for so many years, and that's it. It's now theirs.
It's been a trial and error process.
Like most learning.
Why has it been difficult? You knew it would take time. You figured it would take as long as 10 years, but it's been challenging.
Well, because we knew that was going to be challenging. And I mean, it would be so naive not to think it would be challenging. When any founder or, founder-owner makes a transition to the next generation, it's like almost doing anything that you never done before. And you think about so many organizations, anybody would tell you organizationally, when you're making that kind of a transition, of course it's going to be a new experience. I mean, it's of everything I do. Everything I do, which is a new experience, is going to be challenging. It's going to have problems, it's going to have mistakes. It's this 5-step process that I sort of described in the book.
Are you there yet, or are you at the point where
there.
Bridgewater can function without Ray Dalio?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is, and we know we're there now because of what we've gone through. I mean, when I say no, nobody's 100% sure of anything.
Right.
I couldn't tell you whether we would function with Ray Dalio, but we're at a stage where I've never been more confident that we're in great shape. And let me be clear. I'm not leaving the investment part of the thing.
You'll remain a co-CIO.
I'm going to remain I love investments. I love economics. That's my game. My objective is to not ever be needed, to watch others be successful without me. And we are there. I get to play my game, but I don't want to be needed, and I'm not needed.
You thought you were there before, though. How do you know that you have the right leadership in place? You've got 2 co-CEOs in Eileen Murray and David McCormick. You've got 2 fellow co-CIOs with Greg Jensen and Bob Prince. How will you know that that's the right mixture? And what if one of those people, what happens if one of those people leaves?
Well, that's the beauty of it. I mean, you just rattled off the co's. Okay, so there's a co-CEOs, there are co-CIOs. There's always backup, and there's that kind of duplication. There's a board that's overlooking at it. Many of the things that weren't in place when we started this journey. So I would say if you compare us with almost any company, and you say, do you have co-CEOs? Do you have co-CIOs? Do you have a team, a large team, who's worked together for a long time? It's probabilities. So we've evolved. I think all organizations go through this, particularly when you have a founder-owned company, and it's important to work out that way.
The founder's still going to be around. He's still going to be managing the portfolios.
That's right, but it's like a father with. I don't know. Maybe that's a bad analogy, but it's like a father with the kids, and the next generation. Except the kids are 40 years old. So I'm happy to be a mentor, but my greatest success is when others don't need me. That's the idea of the book. Everything that I know about life and work is in that book. And everything I know about economics and investments will be in the next book. And really, I do believe that there's nothing that I know that's of value that isn't in those 2 books. And I'm also watching them independently, beyond those principles, do great. So I feel good about this transition. I don't think anybody has paid more attention to transition and has been more transparent about that transition than we have. And when you think, how many organizations have over 60-year leaders who are not talking about transition, who are not so transparent, who don't write the rules, who haven't begun a 7-year process? I mean, I would worry about them, not about us, right?
This next book that will contain Bridgewater's economic and investment principles, to me, it sounds like you're going to give away the Colonel's secret recipe of 11 herbs and spices to Kentucky Fried Chicken. Why do it?
No. So again, it's my economic principles and that, which of course are complementary. But it's like the 30-minute video that I gave, how the economic machine works. I mean, basically, half of what I think, or most all important things that I think, are contained in that 30-minute video.
This will be similar.
This will just be a more complete version of that. So it's the sort of things that don't have the precision of the calculations or anything like that. They're just the concepts.
You're not giving away the algorithms.
Right. Oh, no, I'm not giving away the algorithms. No, but I am giving away the concepts.
Bridgewater was one of the few hedge funds that made money during the financial crisis. That turned founder Ray Dalio into something of a guru. Policymakers around the world came knocking, seeking his advice.
You talk in the book about your dialogue with Mario Draghi, and you talk about the pleasure you took advising other public officials. Is that something you want to do more of?
Yeah, as long as they find it helpful, I find it helpful. I want, yeah.
How good or bad a job are those public officials collectively doing right now managing the world economy?
Well, by and large, there's fiscal policy, there's monetary policy, and that's what they're doing. If I take monetary policy, I think that they have done a remarkable job, that we have had what I call a significant, beautiful deleveraging. And what I mean is that our debt burdens and our debt service burdens have gone down while the economy has grown, and we haven't had an inflation problem. And they did that by understanding the mechanics and the engineering, and I really do think to some extent I was able to be of some help in terms of that exercise, but I think they've done a beautiful job. And so if you look at the economy right now, for the shorter term where we have a situation where we don't have too much inflation and too little inflation, and we don't have too much growth and too little growth, and we don't have a debt bubble, and so on. We have something that is reasonable in terms of those types of conditions. This is very different than 2008. We have a political situation which is difficult. We have a wealth gap and an opportunity gap, which is a difficult situation. And we have very big obligations coming forward, pension obligations, health care obligations that are going to be a burden. That's going to be a gradual problem. But the way that those those who are running monetary policies have handled that well. By and large, fiscal policy I think reasonably well. It's a very much more politicized area. So
that's a much more favorable characterization than a lot of people would give fiscal policy. Most people would give fiscal policy 2 thumbs down.
Yeah. You hear a hesitancy in terms of my giving it compliments relative to the other, but I think that the political environment itself is such a difficult environment, and so politics itself is dysfunctional. And I mean, we have to talk about how to deal with idea of meritocratic, thoughtful decision-making. That's a different question. But nonetheless, if you take the individuals and you put them in their jobs, and you're asking how do they do in those jobs, all things considered, and all, that's the problem. Those are things that we have to consider, that they have done in fiscal policy. Yeah, I think the political system is a very challenging situation.
If you were advising the president, what would you tell him to do, or what would you suggest that he do?
The most important thing is to make sure that we understand what the country's principles are that bind us together rather than those that divide us. To have idea meritocratic decision making, to try to come up with the best collective decisions, to bring the country together in an idea meritocratic way. I think the period that we're in reminds me very much of 1937, if I was to pick an analogous period of time, because at that time, it was after the financial crisis. We had 29 to 32, which is the equivalent of our 2008, 2009. They printed a lot of money, asset prices went up, interest rates went to zero, and we had a large wealth gap which created populism, analogous. the central bank begins to tighten monetary policy. And then we had a populism, and we had a fall in the stock market, and we had conflict.
So we are once again at that precipice?
Well, yes, we have we cannot have a tightening of monetary policy that's material. We have a very large wealth gap, a very large gap that the top 0.2% of the population's wealth equals the bottom 90% of the population's wealth. And it's not just wealth, there's a polarity. And this is a time where we have both of those things. If you can't have an economic downturn because socially and politically we could not stand an economic downturn, right? We will be at each other's throats. It's a threat to our system, right? So it's in many ways analogous, that those tensions, that conflict, I think it's in many ways analogous. So that's fearful to me. So when you ask what I would recommend the President of the United States to do, is to try to deal with conflict well, to bring people together, to not make one side in a battle with the other side, and to try to have idea meritocratic ways to get at the best decisions. That's what I would recommend the President do.
You write in your book, only people can discover things and then program computers to do them. Today, when people think about inequality, they worry about the risk that they'll be replaced by machines. Will your statement always be true? Will humans always have an edge over computers? Or will computers replace us?
The notion of intuitions, imagination, the same type of creativity comes from millions of years of programming that is in the brain. If you have
genetic programming.
Genetic programming, okay? We have a lot of genetic programming that are those intuitions. I think that for the foreseeable future, for a very, very long time, those elements will not be able to be achieved in the same way as the computer is. And so the best thing is when the computer and man, imaginative people, are working together. But we're coming into an era in which basically you can either code, in other words, take your imaginations and encode them, which is the new language. Have your kids learn coding, because if not, they will not know. It's equivalent of not knowing how to read and write. They will need to express themselves that way. And when you have that and working with the computer, that's the ultimate power. And I think that that's where we're heading.
And if you don't have it, you get replaced by a computer?
It's either you're doing the programming or you're getting replaced by a computer. For the most part, for a lot.
People worry about that. Do you worry about it?
I do worry about it, but I worry, there's an economic component. This split is a big thing. I just did a study for examining the bottom 60% of the economy. So this is the majority of Americans. And if you look at the conditions of the majority of Americans, the bottom 60%, it is a very bleak picture. Averages don't convey it, and unless you're in the middle of it, you don't see it. And that is intolerable. That's going to be a problem. Now, how you deal with it that's a complicated question, because in many cases, evolution and productivity is connected to this wealth disparity. It's producing the wealth disparity, and it's producing those things. So it's going to become increasingly challenging to figure out what do you do about it. That's a whole big topic.